With the signing of Jake Gardner yesterday, will the Carolina Hurricanes be moving another defenseman, possibly a guy like Justin Falk? Plus, the Pittsburgh Penguins are still in a bit of a salary cap crunch. They're technically over the cap and need to sign RFA defenseman Marcus Peterson. So what moves might they make to become cap compliant? Plus, the Chicago Blackhawks will finally come to terms with RFA forward Brendan Perlini. We'll get into all the latest news and rumors coming up next. So welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. Now let's get started first with the news from around the NHL. The Chicago Blackhawks and RFA forward Brendan Perlini coming to terms on a one-year contract worth $874,000. Now you can't help but wonder why a deal of this magnitude would take so long to come to terms with. We saw the same thing with some other smaller deals over the last number of days. Obviously, the other RFAs are certainly holding things up around the league, and some of these guys obviously clearly wanted to wait and try to get as much money as they can. But at this point, they're running out of time, and we've seen many guys sign, between $800,000 and $900,000. And now, waiting isn't always helping here, as many of the top big RFA names are still unsigned and still remain out there looking for that next contract. But fortunately for the Blackhawks, all of their contract situations are now totally looked after. Of course, Brendan Perlini was acquired by the Hawks last year and put up 15 points in 46 games, so he's certainly looking to bounce back and have a better season, hopefully get more opportunity to play with some stronger players, and we'll see where he can go. But right now, at least the Blackhawks have everything in order, can head into training camp without any unsigned players. Now, as I mentioned, the Pittsburgh Penguins have an unsigned player themselves, and that's RFA defenseman Marcus Peterson, who they acquired last year from the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for forward Daniel Sprong. Now, Marcus Peterson, I think, did a pretty good job in Pittsburgh. He seemed to fit in quite nicely. I know they've been quite happy with him. But right now, the Pittsburgh Penguins find themselves in a salary cap crunch. They've been in that predicament now for a number of weeks throughout the offseason. And as we're not too far away from training camps opening up, nothing has really changed. Of course, we saw the Penguins make a substantial trade earlier in the summer, trading big-time point producer and former All-Star Phil Kessel to the Arizona Coyotes in exchange for Alex Galchenyuk and a prospect and pick here. But obviously, they have other things that they likely could do. Now, of course, with Peterson needing to be signed, I've heard Jim Rutherford say before they ideally would like to sign him to a longer-term contract. They could probably lock him up longer-term without having to spend too much money. And if they see him being a second or third pair guy for many years to come, it could turn out to be a very valuable asset longer term. But right now, like I said, they can't really sign anybody without putting themselves further over the cap, which they technically could do for the short term. But by the time training camp gets underway and the season starts, they have to be cap compliant anyway. So figuring it out sooner than later certainly seems to be important. Now, what moves could the Penguins end up making? Well, if you look at their roster as per cap friendly right now, they could do a demotion or two because they have more than enough defensemen and forwards. That's not going to create a whole lot of room, though. They could opt to do that if Peterson would agree to maybe a one-year contract, sign him for somewhere around $900K, maybe $1 million or something to that effect. They could probably work something out like that by moving maybe one defenseman or one forward down to the minors. That is a possibility, but with the desire to sign him long term, and I would think the desire is there on the player's part as well, we might have to see something a little bit more significant. Now, of course, there has been some questions on the future of Justin Schultz with the team. Of course, he's emerged to be a top defenseman for them over the years, especially in times when Chris Letang has been out injured. He's in the final year of his contract, so he will be a pending unrestricted free agent. And based on their overall salary cap situation, he very well might prove to be too expensive to retain. Now, I'm sure the Penguins would like to keep him because he's been very valuable, but like I said, it might just prove to be too expensive. So you have to question what his future holds, and I do think that something like him, they probably wouldn't trade now, but depending on how the season goes, if things get off the rails, for example, and it was looking like they were going to fall back in the standings and maybe not make the playoffs, I could see him going as a rental somewhere, maybe near the deadline. But I don't see them moving a guy like him right off the bat in training camp because obviously he could be proved to be a very valuable piece longer term. Now, of course, in the goaltending situation, you get Matt Murray, who's a pending restricted free agent. We've heard comments from Jim Rutherford before indicating he wasn't too concerned about signing him just yet because where he's restricted, they got lots of time. I'm not really sure they're real pleased with where the goalie market has gone, and we've seen contracts escalate, so that probably is a concern for them as well. But then you got guys like Tristan Jarry and Casey DeSmith. Now, DeSmith has a longer term contract that's a little bit more expensive, so obviously he's proven to be be the more consistent backup than Jerry over the last year or two. So he might be more desirable to keep, but at the same time, very well could prove to be a tradable asset to kind of get themselves to being cap compliant, and maybe get a decent return. But at the same time, it really boils down to how they feel about Murray and whether or not he can play a large number of games, remain healthy, which has been a problem for him in his young NHL career. Then of course you look to the forward group, and we've heard names like maybe Patrick Hornqvist or maybe a Brian Rust. There's certainly some other names that have been out there, but yet we haven't seen much maneuvering. But I do fully suspect that there's a good possibility we might see another trade out of the Pittsburgh Penguins organization sometime before training camp is over, before the season starts. Obviously, they need to get Marcus Peterson into training camp, so getting him signed sooner than later is a top priority for them. And like I said, they very well might go down the route of getting him to sign a short-term contract if he's agreeable to that. To kind of give themselves a little bit more time. But ultimately, I do think it's quite possible we could see a trade sometime as well. But it's going to happen soon. So let me know down below in the comment section, how do the Penguins handle their cap situation and getting Peterson signed? If they are going to make a trade, who do you think is the most likely candidate to be moved out? Now, speaking of trades, let's talk about the Carolina Hurricanes, who we saw them make a pretty substantial acquisition yesterday, signing UFA defenseman Jake Gardner to a 4-year contract, just over $4 million per year. And ultimately, it looks like a pretty good deal, pretty bargain contract. I mean, we figured Jake Gardner would be one of the top UFA defensemen on the market this summer, and look how long it took him to get his deal. Maybe as part of the injury that he suffered last year might have scared some teams off. It's really difficult to say, but when you see other teams like the Vancouver Canucks signing Tyler Myers to a more rich contract, and even the Maple Leafs, who acquired Cody Ceci from Ottawa, signing him to a pretty much slightly more expensive contract as well, it certainly goes to question how this all came to be and how Gardner ended up signing for less money. It's certainly a great signing by the Hurricanes, but they already had a really strong blue line. If you take a look at their blue line right now, they got guys obviously like Justin Falk, who seems to be the most likely trade candidate, but they've also got some really strong defensemen like Jacob Slavin, Brett Pesce, they have Dougie Hamilton, Trevor Van Riemsdyk, they acquired Gustav Forsling, they got youngsters like Hayden Fleury and Jake Bean knocking on the door as well. So, I mean, they do have a lot of riches in the defense department, and moving a guy like Falk, who's in the following year of his contract, a pending UFA, who they did have extension talks with over the summer, but have not gone well. And there were reports as well that the Hurricanes were having a lot of trade talk around Falk at the draft. Obviously, a deal was never completed, but there was a lot of talk going on, and we do have reports as well indicating that there have been several offers on the table over the summer, and that it's not a foregone conclusion that he even starts training camp with the Hurricanes. And I do think because of the Gardner acquisition, that likelihood certainly goes up here a little bit. They have way more defensemen than what they need, and they very well could look to add in other areas. I mean, now, clearly in the goaltending department, they're likely running with Mrazek and Reimer. They could possibly look to move Falk for a forward, but they've also made some good acquisitions in that regard over the summer as well. I mean, they already have guys like Sebastian Aho locked up now for 5 years. Obviously, Nino Niederreiter has been a great fit, and Teravainen certainly played well. Svechnikov's coming a long way. They have Martin Necas, who's hopefully going to take a step this year. And then they signed Ryan Dzingel. They brought in Eric Holla via trade from Vegas as well. So they've certainly added a lot to the forward department, but they are going to be without Justin Williams since he's announced he's not going to be with the team, at least to start the year. So they may be going out to acquire a veteran forward to have a little bit more of a leadership presence there. Certainly might be a possibility. I mean, I know they do have a guy like Jordan Stahl who's got a lot of experience, former co-captain of the team as well. So they're not completely without leadership. They're not completely without experience. The whole team gained from a long playoff run last year as well, which is great. But certainly a possibility here. I think if Falk is moved, I think more than likely the return would be maybe some kind of a forward with a bit of experience who can maybe add a little bit more to that leadership core and maybe be with the team for longer term. At least that's what I think is the most likely return on Falk. But I do think he's the most likely to go out of all the Canes defensemen. But let me know what you think down below. Does the signing of Jake Gardner basically signal the end of Justin Falk's time with the Carolina Hurricanes? And do you expect a trade before training camp wraps up and before the NHL 2019-2020 NHL season gets underway? So that is all your latest NHL news and rumors for today. Of course, as always, if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. Of course, we have daily NHL content here to keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors from around the NHL. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you next time.